Finance Minister, were you surprised at Friday's rating downgrade by Standard & Poor's?
Surprised in the sense that it was unscheduled. And the way we learnt about this was I was at these annual meetings in Tokyo and had scheduled meetings with all three of the agencies of the four that do ratings for South Africa. And when meeting S&P, they suddenly tell us that in fact they are going to emerge with new ratings. So yes, it was a surprise. They didn't stick to the schedule that they were supposed to. By contrast, for example, I also met Fitch, and Fitch are due to visit South Africa in November. They reassured us that they would stick to their schedule, that they would wait for the medium-term budget policy statement and for the Mangaung conference of the ANC to be concluded, and then they'll give their view to us in January. So, yes, in that sense, it was a surprise. I thought the public should know some of the context and the way this has happened.
Sure. But having said that, and there was an article yesterday quoting Deputy Central Governor Daniel Minele, who said in that Reuters article that, yes, it is disappointing, but some of the criticism by Standard & Poor's is pretty valid.
Valid in the extent that if you say that there might be uncertainties about what the ANC's conference is going to emerge with, well, obviously, because the conference hasn't concluded yet. And there's still a policy debate happening. If you say there's uncertainty about who might emerge as the new president of the ANC, Mr. Zuma or anybody else, well, that's also self-evident because the conference hasn't been concluded yet. And the competitive process is still taking place. If, on the other hand, some of the stuff that you've been quoting, which says that there could be fiscal impact because of some of these phenomena, there we would disagree, and all we would say is wait until next Thursday. Let us tell the nation what we think the fiscal framework should be, as agreed by Cabinet on the 10th of October last week. And as we've demonstrated for many years in South Africa, we will demonstrate again that we will work within the realities of the situation.
But again, the validity comes out of the fact that they talk, for instance, about the growth prospects for our economy. In fact, they've even gone as far as saying that, I'm going to read here from their statement. They say, due to the production losses, S&P now expects GDP growth to soften to not more than 2.5% in 2012, and the current account deficit to increase to at least 5.1% now. The very same deputy governor that I spoke about said in an article that growth forecasts will most likely need to be revisited. Isn't that valid? That because of the problems that we've seen, not only in the mining sector, but transport as well, and elsewhere in this economy, we may have to revise growth.
Oh, but we've been saying that for months. So somebody hasn't been reading or listening.
Sure.
I've been saying that here for months. And it's a self-evident truth that the situation globally isn't improving much. If at all, and the Tokyo meetings just make it worse for us in the sense that there's no glimmer of hope emerging from there. And secondly, we've also said, also very openly, that the recent events in South Africa are going to damage exports for a start. They're going to have implications for the current account deficit. They're going to have implications for revenue, and they're going to have implications for growth. So the Deputy Governor is absolutely in tune with what all of us have been saying for some time now.
So if then we should expect these changes in this economy, they are then right to say that perhaps when we go to these conferences, people will start making populist calls about how we should deal with these matters?
Well, there are so-called populist calls all over the world. We're not unique, and when you travel around, you begin to actually see that. And finally, the test, both of the ANC and of the government, is not to worry so much about the populist calls as much as to redouble our efforts to make a meaningful difference in the lives of the majority of South Africans, to make sure that as government we deliver upon the programs that we've agreed upon, and that would improve informal settlements, that would improve the ability to access water, electricity, and sanitation, that will ensure that our children who go to school get quality education, that our health services actually work. And it's those areas that we need to make work better. But finally, it's not just government that needs to work differently and better. All of us as South Africans need to recognize that there are huge deficits in our society.
Sure.
And all of us have a contribution to make. And one of the challenges with the way in which some of us have these public discourses is everything comes to the door of government. Now, where are the other social actors? What responsibilities and roles do they have? What do ordinary South African citizens have as their responsibility? Because the middle-class South Africans, or whatever background they come from, must recognize that their middle-class status is a privileged status in South Africa. And there are many who are not as privileged as them. And that for the next 10 or 15 years, we'll all have to make some sacrifices, just as we did to get up to apartheid, in order to improve the situation for the majority in South Africa.
And again, Dr. Friedman, I'm going to bring you in a minute. But, Minister, in order for everybody in South Africa then to march and take that particular line, somebody's got to lead. David Ward, in responding to the S&P downgrade, said over the weekend that we are being punished, rightfully so, for weak political and uncertainties around leadership, he said.
That again is another area that I'm sure Steven Friedman would be better qualified to comment on. But my own view, for what it's worth, is that leadership doesn't just reside in one place in society. That each sector of our society has a role and a responsibility to, inverted commas, take the lead. So if we're talking about the business sector in South Africa, you can't say government must lead business. Business must provide leadership. If you're talking about the labor sector in South Africa, same thing. In civil society, the same thing.
Sure.
So my conception of leadership is very different. It's one which says that leadership lies all over in our society, and each of us that have something to do with the economy, with improving the lives of people, and changing the economic trajectory of our society need to be activated and make a difference in the short term and in the medium term.
All right. Dr. Friedman, then your thoughts on this comment, particularly by David Ward, about us being punished, rightfully so, for a lack of political leadership.
Well, Kolani, I think it's part of a myth which is circulating in the society at the moment, which incidentally the rating agencies seem to buy into. And that myth, as the Minister has just implied, is that all our problems are simply the fact that we happen to be governed by a particular group of people. Now, clearly this is false. Government has a responsibility. Of course, government has a responsibility. And we as citizens need to hold government to account for that responsibility. But government is not the only institution that has power in this society. We have massive corporations which have power. We have labor unions which have power. We have professional associations which have power. We have media which have power. And all of those power holders have a responsibility for what happens in our economy. It's not just business. So, we have this endless argument in this country which simply implies that somehow if the people who were governing us went away and they were replaced by some other people, then suddenly we would live happily ever after. That's clearly not true. And as I said before, that doesn't for one moment say that government must be let off the hook. Obviously, it shares responsibility for what happens in the society. But I think we also need to put what's happening with the rating agencies into context here.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it needs to be said, and really I'm not arguing for complacency here, there is an inbuilt bias in the rating agencies at the moment, which we need to be aware of. And the bias is this, that a few years ago, the rating agencies, quite correctly in many people's view, got wrapped over the knuckles and their credibility was damaged because they allowed all sorts of borrowers a free ride, and we had the global financial crisis, and they had to take part of the responsibility for that because they were giving green lights to people who shouldn't have been given green lights. Obviously, what they're doing now, all over the world, is overreacting and giving red lights whenever they can see it. And, we need to be aware, we're not the only country to be downgraded. I mean, there's a sort of festival of downgrading going on all around the world.
But Dr. Friedman, do you think in this country, is it overreacting? I mean, let's take one company, Amplatz. They were reporting, I think, last week sometime that they've lost over R1 billion as a result of the strike. Some may say, well, they have serious reason to be concerned about what's going on in this economy.
Well, I'm not minimizing that, Kolani, but look, let me say first of all that every time we have strikes in this country, people produce these, and I haven't looked at the AMPLAT figure, but people produce these rather wild calculations of how much was lost, which only tell one part of the story. And obviously I'm not saying that strikes are good for us, but what I'm saying is that this constant hand-wringing which says that every time we have a strike we lose billions ignores the fact in the case of platinum that the stuff is still in the ground, it hasn't gone anywhere, people are going to be mining it over the next while or so, and that will reduce the costs. So I think I'm not saying we should minimize it, I think we should have a sense of perspective. But I think the other point which needs to be brought home very clearly is that I think also behind the thinking of the rating agencies and a lot of South Africans, or certainly South Africans who influence the debate, is a particular view of how this country operates, which is not accurate. It's a view which says that, look, deep down, there are millions of savage people in this country who don't understand the way the market economy works, who are just itching to get their hands on the property of wealthy people, and that it's the job of the government to keep them in check. Our problem in this country is not poor people. Our problem is middle-class people. Poor people have a very pragmatic and sensible and rational view of how you operate in the economy. It's very often the middle-class people who don't, and the middle-class people need to take responsibility for that.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, please come in, Minister.
I think Steven has made two very important points that I want to reinforce. Mm-hmm. And we've got to do a lot more to keep our public better informed rather than just repeat in a sheepish way what somebody says yesterday and then repeat it today. The one is worldviews. Right? Each of us in our writings, in our thought processes represent a particular set of values and a particular set of biases and a particular set of interests. And what I think would be very helpful in the interest of democracy is when people speak either as economists or anything else, they must declare their worldview. Because there are different worldviews that, in a sense, for example, in the most sharp way, are clashing in the United States election. Right? The one worldview is minimal state, no increases in taxes, decrease revenue over a time, leave it to subnational entities and indeed the elites